It's a Mailbag Friday here on Locked On Braves. Got a lot of questions to get to, several talking about Michael Soroka. When could he be back? What is going on with his service time manipulation? And why is Yonny Chirinos still in the starting rotation? We'll answer those questions and many more on today's episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am your host, Jacob Mastriani. You can follow me on Twitter at shortstopball. Also, make sure you check out my written work over at bravestoday.com. Make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback you have for the podcast. It's our Mailbag Friday episode, so everything will be done based on the questions that you submitted there on Twitter. So thank you so much for doing that. If you're new on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're watching there, hit the thumbs up button as well to help support the show. And we continue to grow our audience here and get more people in here and get great discussions down in the comment section on YouTube, where you have been just absolutely fantastic and killing it there lately. Thank you so much for all the support. Thanks for making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. I want to give a shout out to Jason Sturkey, Zach Rom, Joey S., Whit Dog, and Captain Tot, who let me know that they are everydayers on our last video. Thank you so much for that. And again, thanks for all the support that you give me there. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Swing for the fences on Sleeper picks, and you can win up to 100 times your money. Download the Sleeper app, use promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. On today's podcast, it is our Mailbag Friday podcast, and I got the tweet out super late on Thursday night, and you still flooded me with questions. I got over 30 questions submitted to that tweet, so we got a lot to get to, and it's going to cover, as usual, a wide range of topics. So apologize, there's going to be no real format to this. If you're looking to skip ahead, I know some of you like chapters, it's going to be none of that, because we're going to be all over the place bouncing around here as I go through some of these Twitter questions. First one I want to get to, though, this one actually came from YouTube, and that's because this person told me they didn't have Twitter, so I wanted to get to their question, and it comes from Zach Rom, who's one of our everydayers from Costa Rica, so got to make sure we get this question here for Zach. He says, I'm new to baseball, started following it last season. Could you explain a little bit about what Soroka's current status is? I remember it was talked about in a previous podcast, but didn't quite understand exactly the day situation. Does that mean we won't see him again in the with the Braves for the rest of the year? So great question. I've been watching baseball pretty much all my life, and I'll be honest, I don't completely understand this. I know Mass Boost, who does a great job commenting in the comment section, he gave a great explanation of it at one point. Wish I would have written it down or copied it somewhere, but I did try to go do a little bit of research to kind of help us all understand this. So an MLB season, I'm just going to read this from the service time glossary, service time definition glossary on MLB.com. It says players receive Major League service time for each day spent on the 26-man roster. That's important. It has to be on the 26-man roster, not the 40-man roster. This is important to players and clubs alike. Service time is used to determine when players are eligible for arbitration as well as free agency. So each major league season consists of 187 days, and each day spent on that active 26-man roster or on the injured list. It's another reason why Ian Anderson is not on the 60-day IL. He is on the minor league IL, so he's not accumulating that service time. So while they're on the active roster or the injured list, major league injured list, a player earns 1 day of service time for each day. A player is deemed to have reached 1 year of Major League service time upon accruing 172 days in a given year. So you don't have to be on it the entire 187. You just have to be on there 172 days in a given year to gain 1 year of service time. And here's the key part. Upon reaching 6 years of Major League service time, a player then becomes eligible for free agency at the end of that season. So what the key here is that the Braves want to make sure they get to the 2025 season and Michael Soroka has less than 6 years of service time. If they do that, then they get him for that 2025 season as well. And we're all just assuming this is what the Braves are doing, and that's why they're keeping him down there. But that is the gist of it. They are trying to make sure that they keep his service time down to a point where if he were with the team all year next year, then they would still get another year of him. So I've heard a lot of people point to the September 13th, September 14th date as to when they could bring him back and still get an extra year of control over him. Right now, Soroka has 4 years and 122 days of service time. So again, you want to make sure he doesn't hit 172 days of service time this year. So again, I don't know exactly when he can come back up and when, they'll still have him for that additional year. But I just kind of wanted to lay it out, as best as I understand it. And again, I'm sure I didn't do that perfectly. Somebody can please try to correct me if you know more about service time and how all that works. Please let us know in the comments section below. But again, I'm just reading that from the service time definition from MLB.com itself to kind of give us all a better understanding of what that looks like. So great question. Hopefully I helped explain that a little bit. If not, again, please read through the comments section. I'm sure there'll be somebody there who can help give further explanation on exactly when Soroka can come back up and how the Braves are trying to play with that. But again, I think the gist of it is you want to make sure you get through next season with him still having less than 6 years of service time. Because again, you don't become a free agent until the year after you hit 6 years of service time. All right, next question comes from Joey Milby. He says, hey, Jake, can you kind of compare the different minor league levels to the different levels of college baseball talent-wise? What should we expect from college guys from different levels? I went into more detail on it last night. Joey had sent me a direct message kind of asking some more about that. But here's what I've always heard from scouts. SEC and to some degree the ACC level of competition is comparable to single A. Some may say high A. Some may say, low A. But SEC, ACC college competition is more so comparable to the low A, single A level. That's why you see somebody like a Hurston Waldrop come in at the low A and just kind of dominate. They've been playing at SEC all year where they're playing a lot of players who are going to be in there professionally. The biggest difference for me comes with pitching. There's just not the depth of pitching at the college level. You could honestly say there's not that depth of pitching at the lower levels as well, but I would say is comparable. I would say the SEC, and again, to some degree, the ACC is probably more comparable to high A baseball level of competition on a given day, depending on who's starting and all of that. But for the most part, SEC teams, they're going to have at least 3, 4, if not more, a lot of times more guys in their lineup who are going to get drafted. And a lot of times their weekend rotation, you're going to have at least 2 of those guys who are going to get drafted. And that's on just about every SEC team. So again, you're essentially looking at a low A, high A type, level of baseball right there. All right, getting back into some of these questions. I think I got another one from Joey Milby. He says, do you think Vaughn gets any starts against the Giants this weekend? I do. I think he'll get at least one. Again, if you're just going with the defense of Nicky Lopez, then maybe you do run him out there every day. It's hard for me to believe that they're going to bring up Vaughn Grissom and let him sit on the bench for a week, 2 weeks, whatever, until Ozzie returns. So I think he'll get a start this weekend at some point, especially if the Braves face the lefty, which I don't know if they will. Maybe if Alex Wood pitches in this series. I haven't looked at the rotation for the rest of the weekend. But if they face a lefty, even though Vaughn has reverse splits at the minor league level, I can see him starting one of those games. But I think either way, we'll see Vaughn Grissom at some point this weekend. And then another one from Joey Milby. He says, rank 1 to 5 in likelihood with 42 games left at this point, 1 being most likely to happen. So the categories are Ronnie 40-40, Olsen 60 homers, Strider 300 Ks, Braves win 100, and Braves break home run records. So I'll put most likely being number 1, Braves break the home run record. They're on pace for that. I think they're gonna blow past that Twins record in 2019 where the balls were juiced anyway. And then next, most likely to happen, I think Braves are going to reach 100 wins. Their schedule in September is pretty light, so I think they're going to get there even if they do kind of back off a little bit. Third, most likely, I'm going to go Olsen 60 homers. I still think that's a stretch. This is where we're getting to the ones where I don't think they're going to happen, but I could see Olsen reaching 60 home runs. So I'd put that third most likely. I'd put Ronnie 40-40 as the fourth thing on here. I still don't think that's going to happen. He's going to really have to heat up with the home runs here down the stretch. And again, I don't know if the Snicker's going to give these guys some rest or not down the stretch. And so that's probably going to prevent some of these from happening. And that's why I got Strider 300 Ks as my least likely to happen, because I think it's more important for him to be ready to go for the postseason than him reaching 300 Ks, and really hasn't struck out a lot, over the last couple of games. It's kind of knocked his pace down a little bit. And again, I think they're probably going to skip him a start, especially if they keep this big lead in the division. So I would Strider 300 Ks as the least likely. All right, got a lot more questions to get to. It's probably going to be a longer episode, but again, got a lot of questions. I don't want to skip any here. So we'll take a short break and then we'll get back into those questions next. Are you using Sleeper app for daily fantasy baseball? If you're not, then you certainly should be. Sleeper is a fantasy sports plus real money gaming app focused on bringing people together through sports and gaming. I mentioned the other day, I started using the Sleeper app. I can't use it in my state for some of the daily stuff, but you can still do the year-long stuff, fantasy baseball and all of that, fantasy football as well. Started a fantasy football league with some listeners here on the podcast and really loving using the app. It's very easy to use, user-friendly, and pretty sleek as well. You got a direct message thing in there that you can use. So it's been really great. And if you want the chance to win more money with less picks, head to Sleeper, the #1 sports app, where you can win up to 100 times your money on just 2 or more fantasy baseball picks. If you think Braves player Matt Olson, Ronald Acuna Jr., somebody's going to hit a home run this weekend, which there's a good chance of that happening, well, all you got to do is pick 2 players and more or less on them hitting home runs, getting hits, whatever it may be, and you could win big. Use the promo code Locked On and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. Jumping back into the questions here, but before we do that, the Braves and Giants will start a series on a Friday night at 7:20 p.m. Eastern. Catch every pitch of the Braves' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search Braves. All right, now jumping back into your questions. Next one coming from Acuna's Neck Tat says, how important do you think the #1 seed in the NL is? Obviously, home field over LA is big, but it seems like the #2 might get an easier NLDS opponent. #1 gets wild card 1, who could be Philly, or wild card 2 in San Francisco, whereas #2 gets the central winner, Milwaukee, or wild card 3. Presumably wild card 1, 2 will be very hot teams. So good question here. Honestly, you can't really worry about it. And I like the GIF you use because it's honestly not worth spending that much time thinking about it. I think the home field advantage is more important, even though I know it doesn't mean as much in baseball, but you look at the way Braves fans have packed out Truist Park and just the advantage that is. I think you want that home field advantage. I would not go all out for it at the expense of overexerting guys down the stretch, like guaranteeing that Olsen, Riley, Acuna play 162 just for the sake of them playing 162. You got a 10-game lead in the last 2 weeks of the season. I wouldn't mind giving those guys some rest. And then, like I said earlier, even skipping a start for Strider, for Morton, for Elder, for Fried if you need to, even though he hasn't pitched a lot this year. For me, it's more important about getting those guys rested, having them as healthy as can be going into the postseason. I think that's more important than home field advantage. Look, to win a World Series, you're going to have to beat some good teams. You're going to have to beat some good teams on the road. So I don't really concern myself with it too much. I do still think, even though it didn't work out with the Braves last year, getting one of those top 2 seeds is the most important thing. And there might be another question about that here later. Cavs Buckeyes says, why does OAA grade Ronald's defense so poorly? For what it's worth, Fangraphs fielding runs metrics includes arm and has him as an average defender, but OAA says his range is terrible, significantly worse than Eddie's. He's had some misplays, but it doesn't seem to me like he's awful. So outs above average, strictly outs above average, which is OAA, for those that don't know, it strictly is calculating your range and your jumps. And Ronald doesn't get great jumps. He makes up for it because of his speed. So he's able to take bad jumps and then still get to the ball because of his speed. Eddie can't do that. So Eddie gets bad jumps and he doesn't have the speed. It's not bad speed for Eddie, but he doesn't have the speed to kind of make up for that. Ronald's able to make up for a lot of those bad jumps and reads because of his speed, but he ranks poorly because he doesn't get those good jumps. And you can watch him, and if you see him off the bat, you can kind of see that a little bit more. The stat, and Baseball Savant just came up with this, fielding runs average or something like that, I think is what it's called. It sounds more like the fielding runs metrics you're talking about with FanGraphs. It accounts for arm, and it has Ronald Moore as an average defender as well. But the reason for that is because Ronald just doesn't get great jumps on balls. But again, he still gets to them because he makes up for it with his speed. J Goldie 03 says, assuming everyone's healthy, pick 5 relievers to make up 2023's version of the night shift in the postseason, assuming Iglesias and Minter will play big roles. But who are your other 3? I thought the night shift was only 4 players. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But either way, you're right. Iglesias and Minter, those have to be your 2 dominant guys. I think Joe Jimenez is in that list right now. I think Pierce Johnson is in that list. And then I think maybe Kirby Yates is that 5th guy right now coming out of the bullpen. I think those are the 5 relievers that you have at the moment that you really can have some trust in. Again, Kirby Yates is still on the fringe with me. I know he's been good here lately, but definitely those 4, Jimenez, Pierce Johnson. I think the 3 you really want are Jimenez, Minter, and Iglesias. I think those are your top 3 right now. And then I think you kind of mix in Pierce Johnson and Kirby Yates as well as guys that you kind of trust, but they're still kind of on the edge for me in terms of trust. But those are the 5 that I think you go with. Maybe, and I think there's a question about this lady, maybe AJ Smith-Shawver, if he were thrown into a bullpen role, might enter his way into that, but we'll see. Another one from Acuna's Neck Tat. He says, non-Braves question, how many years would Ohtani have to play at this level, both sides of the ball, to make the Hall of Fame? FYI, he's already at 33.9 WAR in his 6th season. So you got to play 10 years in Major League Baseball to be eligible for the Hall of Fame. So 10 years. I mean, what he's doing, honestly, it's incredible. I think if he gets 10 years and he plays at this level, like you said, I think that could be enough. I think just getting to the 10-year minimum, I think might be enough to put Ohtani in the Hall of Fame. He's been that good on both sides. Anthony says, is Pierce Johnson already 3rd in the bullpen depth chart? Kind of talked about that a minute ago. For me, he's 4th. I still got Iglesias, Minter, and Jimenez as my top 3, and Pierce Johnson would probably be my 4th right now. Baltimore Braves fan, how many starts do you think each of Soroka, Schuster, Dodd, Ian Anderson, and Inoa make in the majors next season for the Braves or otherwise? So I think Soroka is going to get a good run with the Braves next year. Again, depending on how the offseason shakes out, I think he has a real good chance to get that 5th spot in the rotation. So I'd probably say Soroka gets 20 starts next year if he's healthy. Schuster and Dodd, I'm not as sure about. I'd say they probably get somewhere between 5 and 10 starts at most. Ian Anderson, I'm not as sure about either. I don't think he's going to be back till probably mid-season, and they probably take it slow with him coming back. And I don't know about Inoa either. I think Inoa's coming back in a bullpen role, so I don't know that he comes back as a starter. So I'd say Soroka, you asked how many starts do each of them get. I'd say Soroka gets 15 to 20. Schuster and Dodd get 5 to 10 each. Ian Anderson, maybe 5 max. And I don't know that Inoa gets any. I think he comes back as a bullpen arm. Bellfire says, nothing like 7 against the New York teams to make the pitching look incredible again. Do you think this gets the starters out of their rut, or did bad teams mask their issues for the week? So, yes, I think it gets them out of their rut a little bit. I will say, at least in the Mets series, Morton really didn't have it. He walked 7 guys, but it was a combination of the Mets being bad offensively and him having the stuff to get out of those jams. But it's not like he was pitching great. Much better his last time out against the Yankees, where that curveball was just nasty. For Strider, I think it was the same thing too. He was kind of struggling with fastball location. He pitched 7 scoreless innings, but I think part of that was due to the fact the Mets offense really struggling. We'll see how Strider comes back on Friday night, but sometimes you need that to get on a roll and to get out of that rut, as you mentioned. Again, and I said this the other day, I still believe when Strider, Fried, and Morton pitches at their best, I still think it's one of the better rotations in all of baseball. It's really just been about consistency for those guys this year, particularly Charlie Morton. But even in the case for Strider, I mean, he'll have games where he only gives up, 2 runs or less, but then he's had some big blowups this year as well. A lot of that due to the huge home run rate that has skyrocketed for him this season. So I do think playing those teams who are obviously down right now certainly helped, and hopefully does get them back on track. Annabelle Self, if baseball playoffs are a crapshoot in a matter of getting hot at the right time, how can a team get hot for the postseason? Is there a way to make that without luck involved? If you got the answer, if any of you got the answer, you'd be hired as a major league team right now. I don't think anybody's ever really figured that out. It's been a question in baseball for as long as I can remember following this sport, and it's really the idea of rest, versus rust down the stretch. If you have clinched a playoff spot, weeks in advance, how do you stay in that competitive mindset and get geared up for the postseason? And then if you're like the Braves last year, if you're, in a tight race all the way to the end, how do you not get exhausted when it comes time for the playoffs? And look, bottom line is you got to bring it. It's the postseason. If you're not energized, you're not focused and ready to go, then that's on you. But I don't know that there's a simple formula, and I think it could be player specific too. But I think, and Frenchie kind of touched on this the other night, if you were in the Braves, the position the Braves are now, and you have this big lead with 2 weeks left, rest these guys the week before the final week. And when the final week comes, you're playing every day, you're getting locked in, you're getting focused, you're getting that timing down. And then there has to be something with that gap between the end of the season and when the top 2 seeds get to play that weekend. Got to find something in between there to try to keep your timing, because that's the biggest thing. Players who are used to playing every day and then you give them 4 days off, it's hard to sometimes find that timing again. But again, I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think that's a question that many teams have been asking for, again, as long as I can remember watching the sport of baseball. Matt Wren, with Lee's return imminent and Chavez, Anderson, and Heller soon as well, what is the pecking order of relievers to get sent down to Gwinnett or DFA'd? I don't think Heller has to return anytime soon. He has options, I believe, so he doesn't have to come back. As for the other two, Chavez and Anderson, I don't know that they're that close. I think they're probably going to be mid-September. I know we had video of Chavez throwing live BP the other day, so maybe he's a little bit closer to being back. You got to remember that rosters expand 2 spots in September. Only one of those roster spots can be a pitcher. But again, I think those guys are still pretty far away. So I think you could probably see somebody go on a phantom IL stint at that point. Colin McHugh, I've been saying for a while, would be one of my first guys out. I don't think they'd get rid of Brad Hand, but if Dylan Lee was ready, you don't need the third lefty, and he hasn't exactly had the results since coming over to the Braves, especially against lefties. I don't think they would do that, but again, Yonny Chirinos is a guy who's probably going to get DFA'd at some point, but that's to make room for a starter. But you look at the rest, I mean, you're not getting rid of Iglesias, Jimenez, Johnson, Minter, Tonkin's another one that could probably go. You're not getting rid of Yates. So I'd probably put it, Tonkin's probably the first one to go. I'll correct a minute ago. I'd say Tonkin's probably the first one to go, then McHugh. Those would probably be the 2 guys. And then if you had to, then Hand. But again, at that point, rosters would probably be expanded. So I'd say Tonkin and McHugh are probably the ones on the chopping block for me. Nicholas Petrilli says, if Ronald Acuna Jr. keeps his batting average as is and hits 40 home runs and steals 70-plus bases, would this be the greatest offensive season by a player of all time? It's a great question. I'd have to look that up, but you're talking about a guy hitting 330, 340 with 40 home runs and 70 steals. I mean, that's an easy MVP candidate right there. Whether or not it's the best offensive season of all time, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. I'm sure there have been some great seasons over the years, but when you're talking about a combination of power and speed, I definitely don't think we've seen a season like that. He's on a historic pace right now, so I think it would definitely be up there as one of the best offensive seasons of all time. But to call it the greatest, I'm not sure. I have to do a little bit more research on that. Dan Smith says, assuming the Braves clinch the division with a few weeks to spare, do you think Snit will rest starters? What do you think would be best? I worry too much rest will make the players stale, but obviously an injury at the end with nothing to gain would be disaster. So I kind of already talked about this. I would the week before the final week, I would rest some guys. I don't want to end the streaks for Olsen and Riley and Acuna if that's, their goals or whatever, but at least let them start and then maybe take them out after a bat or two and get them some rest. I would sit them. I think, again, it's more important to have those guys healthy and rested for the postseason and them reaching some sort of personal accomplishment. I think it's more so for the starting pitchers. I would skip them a time in the rotation if you could. I would work that out. I'd work that out starting in September. If you still got a double-digit lead, I'd look for opportunities to start skipping guys with off days wherever you can. But as for the position players, the week before, I would rest them. And then that final week, I'd play them every day to get them as much reps as they can to try to keep that timing for the postseason. But again, no perfect formula there for that. Sean Griffin says, Vaughn Grissom or Nicky Lopez? I like Lopez, but I'm cautious with him waiting for the slump. I like the attitude and aggressiveness. Also, the Winans kid was exciting to watch. Would like to see more of him on the mound. And then an update on Wright and Ozzie. So we had a podcast earlier in the week talking about Vaughn versus Lopez. I don't really think there's a bad choice here. Lopez, if you want a little bit more defense. Grissom, if you want a little bit more offense. It seems like right now they're going with the defense at the moment, but hopefully we still get to see some of Vaughn Grissom while he's up here. As for Alan Winans, I think he has a good shot at coming back. Again, I don't think the Braves want to get rid of the depth right now. They may try to ride it out with Chirinos till September, then rosters expand. And then maybe we see Winans come back up at that point. But he's impressed me in his 2 starts, even in the one in Milwaukee where he didn't make it through 5. I thought he looked pretty good there. So I think we'll see another, or I think he'll get another opportunity at some point. Kyle Wright, throwing BP. I think he's supposed to throw a live BP session soon. Ozzie, no real update there. He just went on the IL. So again, nothing really that we've heard other than that hamstring was still sore. Chris Sundstrom says, burning questions. Why do they toll the bell at Truist Park when a Braves batter has a 3-1 count? Also, sometimes they ring a doorbell, but I haven't figured out the pattern for that one. Any ideas? I think Chris is being funny here for all the people out there saying that the Braves are cheating. I don't know if there's any truth to what he's saying at all, but I hope and think that's a joke. But there's plenty of people out there trying to say the Braves are cheating and making up all kinds of ridiculous claims. Christopher Jenkins, does Spencer have time to right his Cy Young ship, or did the Pittsburgh start sink it? I think he does, because there's nobody in the National League that I think is just a runaway candidate right now. And Spencer Strider, because of all his dominant stats, a lot of voters look at FIP where Spencer Strider's, top of the league. They're going to look at strikeouts where Spencer Strider is top of the league. I've been saying all along, if he can get that ERA under 3.5, I think he still has a legitimate chance to win the Cy Young, but he's got to rip off several starts in a row of going 7 innings and 1 earned or less to really get that ERA down to a spot where I think he could win the Cy Young. I saw a poll the other day, and he was still ranked as the number 4 guy in the NL Cy Young race right now. So again, he's still in it and still in consideration, but got to get it going. Big Dog Fan 73, updates on Cole Phillips and Adam Meyer. Are they ever going to pitch? So I have a little bit of insider information on Cole Phillips. I do know that he's throwing, but they're just kind of being cautious with him coming back. Adam Meyer, I've heard nothing about, and I've tried to reach out and find some information on him. He was supposed to pitch this year, but again, haven't been able to find out any information on Adam Meyer. So hopefully we get some soon. I want to see both of those guys pitch. A Bear says, who do you believe is our unsung hero? To me, it's Elder. Elder's a good one. Orlando Arcia, just because, the guy wasn't supposed to win the shortstop job. Myself included, didn't think he was going to win it coming out of spring training. He did, and then he was the starting shortstop in the All-Star game. You can say Elder as well, who, again, was an All-Star player. So both of those guys for me are pretty unsung heroes, even though we know them at this point, but there were guys that we weren't really, Elder didn't make the rotation out of spring training. So those are guys that we didn't expect much from, and we've gotten a lot from. Jason Davies, if the Braves lead the East continues and they lock up the division with a couple weeks to spare, how do you see Snit balancing resting players, avoiding injuries, keeping everyone sharp, especially considering they are likely to get rest through the wild card round? I already touched on that a little bit earlier, so again, not going to go over that again, but appreciate the question. Riley says, after Vine's latest start, would you give him a shot if they ever end this Yonny Chirinos experiment, or would they give the call up to. Also, who goes down to bring Lee back up? We talked about that earlier. I think probably Michael Tompkins, the one on the chopping block right now. If you had to make a cut in the bullpen, I think Winans and Soroka get an opportunity to start over Vines. So I think Vines is still down that depth chart. Brent Wannabe says, should the Braves re-sign Joe Jimenez to a new contract? At the right price, yeah, I certainly wouldn't overpay for him. But in a right deal, I mean, I wouldn't mind getting him back. I'm not sure how old he is. It's obviously been an up and down year for him. I mean, for a while, this looked like a pretty bad trade for the Braves. Him coming out of the gate just did not look good. He's 28 years old. So again, probably effective reliever for a couple of more seasons at least. So I would certainly consider it, but again, he's not somebody I would overpay for. He's got an xERA of 3.52, but a FIP of 2.94, but an xFIP of 3.82. So again, not somebody that I would reach for to re-sign, but again, if you wanted to come back on a 2-3 year deal for $5 or $6 million, you could replace that Kirby Yates money. I wouldn't hate it, but I have a feeling he might get more than that in free agency. But I certainly think that they will look to. Why is Torino still starting? Seems like Soroka would be much better option, or either Winans or AJ Smith-Shawver. So I finally get to the question that was a title of this podcast: Chirinos versus Soroka, and I guess versus Winans as well. I think a lot of it has to do with what we started out this podcast talking about, and that's the service time for Soroka, trying to gain an extra year of control with him. And I think the other part of it is depth. The Braves have seen and gone through a lot of depth this year in the starting rotation. So I really think they just want to hold on to Chirinos to keep that depth. And part of it, again, keeping Soroka down for service time. I don't know why you don't just give Winans the opportunity at this point, but again, I don't know. I don't really know the answer to this. I would have given up on Chirinos a couple of starts ago, but maybe the Braves really do see something there in him, and they think they can unlock something if they give them enough time. But to me, he's a glorified, opener, long reliever at this point. If he gets you through 5 innings, great, but most likely he's going to be out after 4 innings at most. He's not going to go through a lineup a third time. So I like what I've seen from Winans better than what I've seen from Chirinos so far. So I don't really know the answer other than the two things I gave you: service time for Soroka and just not wanting to get rid of the depth. Brent Wannabe, is AJ Smith-Shawver an option as a shutdown reliever this playoffs? Kind of alluded to this question earlier, but whether or not he's going to be shut down, I don't know. A shutdown reliever, I don't know. I think he certainly has the ability. His slider in his last start was really good. I think he got like 10 or 11 whiffs on his slider in his last start. If that pitch comes along with him and then that fastball plays up in shorter stints, I think he certainly has the ability to be a shutdown reliever. I want to see it happen, especially in the final month of the season. Again, when rosters expand, I wouldn't be upset if he's one of those guys that's added and you get a look at him and see what he can do as a reliever down the stretch and consider him for the playoffs, because I do think that fastball slider combination he has could make him a shutdown reliever and a real weapon in the postseason. John Sanders, with viable options available in Gwinnett, how can you possibly defend Chirinos getting another start on Saturday? So another question here about Chirinos. I don't know. Again, I other than those two options I gave you a second ago, wanting to keep the depth, wanting to keep Soroka down for service time, I don't know how they continue to roll out Chirinos. I don't know why Alan Winans is not getting another opportunity over Chirinos. So your guess is as good as mine on that one. I'm sure the Braves have their plans and their ideas and their reasons, which are typically the right ones, but this is one I just can't quite figure out. And maybe that means Chirinos is going to go out Saturday and pitch a gem and prove us all wrong, but I don't understand it myself. Brennan says, who in the NL is the worst matchup for the Braves in the playoffs? I mean, I guess I got to say the Dodgers. There's not a team really in the National League that scares me. But that lineup for the Dodgers does. If they're clicking, they got their 2 MVP candidates in Betts and Freeman at the top, and if the Braves pitching isn't on, you could get into a slugfest, which the Braves are capable of doing and winning. But I think you'd have to say the Dodgers in the National League. The Brewers, the Braves just beat them pretty good here not too long ago. They don't really concern me too much. The Phillies, I think if they get hot, we saw what they could do last year. That lineup's good. Trey Turner's gotten hot here lately. Bryce Harper, obviously, really big. So they have a good lineup. They have some guys at the top of their rotation that can get it done. So I'd probably say those two, but nobody in the National League really scares me. If the Braves are playing their game and playing their best baseball, I still think they're the best team in the league. Connor Blackson says, which of the players' contracts currently signed to long-term deals, 5+ years remaining, do you think the Braves are most likely to regret? Should be hard to pick one, but at least one of those players will have a falling off of some sort. So I think if we're talking 5+ years remaining, we're talking about Sean Murphy, we're talking about Austin Riley and Matt Olson, I think. I don't think Acuna or Ozzie really fit into that 5-year time frame, but I would probably say Austin Riley out of those guys. I think, he's somebody, he can have some holes in his swings at time and he can fade a little bit. I think it's years. I mean, all these guys are still really young. Austin's just 26. Matt Olson's 29. So maybe he starts to fade a little bit faster than the others. But I think Riley, his defense is good right now, but it's good in a box. But if that starts to slow down a little bit, those holes start to become a little bit bigger in his swing. I think he's somebody that maybe at the back end of that option, again, we're talking about in 2027, 28, 29, you're paying him $22 million a year. And maybe he's, a $15 million a year player. I don't know. I think maybe that would be one that the Braves start to regret a little bit. I think both the Riley and Olsen ones that maybe in those last couple of years, you really starts to weigh on you a little bit, but still it's $22 million a year. It's not like they're paying them $30 million a year or whatever the Nationals are paying Strasburg to do nothing. So I don't think it'll be terrible. And hopefully by that point, the Braves already have another World Series under their belt. And then you don't really care too much, but that Riley contract goes through 2032. So again, I would imagine the last couple of years of that contract are going to hurt a little bit, but I think both Riley and Olsen fade at the end of their contracts. I just think, that's inevitable at some point, but I still think they're going to be, really good for the next 4 or 5 years when the Braves are in this window. So it doesn't concern me too much. Michael Harris, what is the likelihood for Chirinos being DFA'd in replace of Winans? So another question here about Chirinos. I think it's highly likely if things don't go well on Saturday. I'm still, I don't want to say holding out hope, but I still think there's a possibility that they DFA him before Saturday's game and start Alan Winans. I don't know why you would do that at this point, but definitely if things don't go well on Saturday, I could see them doing that. But again, I probably would have done it 2 starts ago. So it's hard for me to say what the likelihood is because I thought it should have already been done, but I still think one or 2 more starts and he's one more start like he's had, and I think he's gone. Joshua Root, enjoy your podcast. Excellent coverage of the Braves. 2 questions. 1, game 1 of NLDS, who starts, Fried or Strider? I've gone back and forth on this all year. I think Strider at his best is your game 1 starter, but I think Fried's probably the more consistent answer. So I think I'd go with Max Fried right now. A lot of it may depend on how Strider's throwing the ball come that time, because I think his dominance, plays up better in the postseason, and I'd rather get 2 starts of that in an NLDS. But just the consistency of Max Fried, you know what you're going to get out of him, I think maybe leans me more towards him going in game 1. And then second question, what was the point of calling up Grissom for him to just sit on the bench? Why not call up Shoemaker? The value is on defense. Don't disagree. Don't disagree with you at all, other than the point that I think they're going to get Grissom some starts and get a look at him. But yeah, I don't understand. I didn't understand that when they called him up. I said they're not going to call up Grissom just to put him on the bench, and then they did. Maybe Lopez getting off to a hot start had something to do with that, but I don't really understand calling Grissom up to let him sit on the bench. I agree. I would have just rather called up Shoemaker at that point. All right. I think that's all the questions. If I didn't get to yours, I apologize, but we've gone way over time here. So I do appreciate all the questions. Do have a little bit of news that I want to get into and set you up for the weekend. We'll do that next. The Braves start a 3-game series with the Giants on Friday night at 7:20 p.m. Eastern. Catch every pitch of the Braves' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search Braves. All right, it'll be the Braves and the Giants this weekend. You got Alex Cobb versus Spencer Strider on Friday night. Alex Cobb, he's given up 14 earned runs in his last 15 and 2/3 innings in August. Was having a fine season before that, and things kind of blew up on him here. So maybe he's starting to cool down a little bit. The Braves can take advantage of that. Doesn't walk a lot, doesn't strike out a lot. He has a sinker, splitter, a curveball as well. Everything's moving down. So he's trying to get that weak contact, get you to hit it on the ground. So hopefully the Braves can make him get it up in the zone and they can punish him like teams have done the rest of August. As for Strider, want to see him, continue to just get better. Obviously, 7 scoreless against the Mets is a step in the right direction. But even in that start, it didn't feel like he had the greatest command of that fastball. Slider was dominant as it usually is, but just want to see him continue to progress and get better, find that control, limit the walks. I think he still walked 4 batters in that outing. So just having better command, better overall dominance, getting through that 6th, 7th inning, giving up 2 earned or less really is what, we should expect, I think, from Spencer Strider. I think he warrants that high of a level. Giants are 23rd in OPS on the season, 4th most strikeouts in all of baseball, 20th in home runs. So seems like a pretty good matchup for Spencer Strider here. The Giants offense, not the best in baseball, and they do strike out a lot. So hopefully, again, it's another good matchup for Spencer Strider. He can take advantage and get on track, hopefully get back in that Cy Young race. It'll be the Braves and the Giants starting on Friday night at 7:20 p.m. Eastern. It'll be Spencer Strider versus Alex Cobb. Catch every pitch of the Braves hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search Braves. That will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. Thank you so much for submitting your questions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of each and every day. Please make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. You can follow me at shortstopball. Also, make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.